Doo-doo-dee. It's Nandi!
Hello friends, I thought I would do a quick video on the survival event. I'm drawing from my own experience, having briefly been in the top 10 but now down to rank 18, as well as General Zod and FMG, both currently ranked number 1 and 3 on the leaderboard. I'm starting this video off by presenting you with a tier list of the available characters in this game mode. If you only watch for 30 seconds, this is your takeaway. I understand that not everyone will have some of these characters leveled up. I mean, I barely have any Space Marines leveled up apart from the raid ones, and that's just because I prefer Tau. Hopefully, some of the tips and tricks that I provide here are generic enough for you to adapt to your own roster. I'll explain some core fundamentals and concepts and then circle back to the tier list to rationalize some of the choices before going into some more advanced tips for success. Let's start off with the basics. What makes a character good in this game mode? It sounds obvious, but they need to be able to survive. That means characters with high armor stats are best, and if you have a high health stat, that's just gravy. You'll probably have noticed that the only 3 characters I put into the greater good category all had the Mark 10 Gravis armor, which makes enemy attacks go through your armor twice. The next desirable trait in a character is the ability to deal area of effect damage or attack multiple enemies in one turn. Ultimately, survival is a swarm mode, so being able to deal with multiple enemies at once is invaluable. Probably tied in the second most important category is being able to create summons. We know by now that the enemy AI likes to attack summoned units, and by creating summoned units, this keeps your playable characters healthy. The final point is to bring a healer, which is a bit of a soft one because the only available healer for this mode is Incisus. This isn't really make or break, and I know some people in the top 20 leaderboard who have managed it without Incisus, but it's nice to have a healer on board to sustain you through the waves of combat. You fight the Tyranids here, and it's always important to know your enemy, so there are a few things worth pointing out. The smaller Tyranids have the instinctive behavior trait. This means that it can be pretty easy to manipulate the position of the Tyranids. They always try and attack the enemy closest to them, and you can use this knowledge to protect your squishier units. The smaller Tyranids are also susceptible to fleeing battle. If you can overkill one of their neighbouring units, you have a 50% chance of making a unit with this trait flee. This package makes the Tyranid warriors the most dangerous enemies. Not only do the warriors themselves do loads of damage, but they also maintain synapse and allow nearby Tyranids to ignore their instinctive behavior and battle fatigue traits. When the Tyranid warriors are on the battlefield, your squishy units are much more vulnerable and the small Tyranids do not run away. The Tyranid warriors also have the reinforced hive armor passive, which gives them bonus armor and block chance on the turn that they spawn. You can either ignore the Tyranid warriors while they have this passive up, because it disappears on the next turn, or you can use a high damage dealer to focus on them, and more on that later on. There are a couple of points to discuss in terms of power-ups. The power-ups themselves can spawn in sometimes hard to reach locations, either on elevation or next to barbed wire, which can potentially impede your movement. I really like flying characters to help with this. Bellator and Matineo specifically. I like giving the power-ups whenever possible to the characters with Gravis armor. They are most likely to survive and therefore give you the most benefit from them. There are also 2 power-ups in each run that let you refresh the active abilities of your characters. The best target for this is Bellator because the summons have Gravis armor, distract the enemy, and buy time for the rest of your force. If you don't have a big Bellator, then your next best option is a character that has area of effect damage. Options include Calgar, Burshard, Matineo, and more. Something that I learned only recently was that the reinforcement power-up buff stacks between runs. This means that even if your run is going south, pick up the shield reinforcement power-ups. Each of these shields is cumulative. At the moment, having spent 6 tickets and collected all 3 of the shield power-ups in all of those events, I have 18 ready to go for my next run. One word of caution, beware the enemy Tyranids claiming your power-ups from you. I generally try not to stand directly next to a power-up if I can't claim it, or you risk a melee Hormigaunt or melee Tyranid attacking you and claiming the power-up at the same time. If you are 2 hexes away from a power-up, it can still theoretically be claimed by a Tyranid with a ranged attack, but the chances are lower. Fully clearing a wave allows your characters to rank up. A common cause of wiping out is because you haven't killed the old wave of Tyranids. This is most notable when you transition from epic to legendary rarity, when the enemy scaling changes from gold 1 to diamond 3, which is a massive difference. If you haven't killed the enemies from wave 9, then the wave 10 enemies will spawn and often just slaughter your characters. For me, the biggest culprit here is not killing the Ripper Swarms. As you can see in this gameplay from my 18.6k run, I couldn't kill the final Ripper Swarm. As a result, the enemies spawned and slaughtered a lot of my units, frustratingly including my Bellator who still had an active ready to go. Whenever possible, kill the enemy waves as soon as possible. Do not try and turtle up and heal in a corner. This next bit about the summons really mainly applies to Bellator for this quest, but it's still worth talking about. Although your characters scale up as you complete waves, the summons they create do not. So if you summoned with Bellator against epic difficulty enemies, then the Inceptors remain at epic rarity even after the rest of your characters progress to legendary. The best time to summon with Bellator is usually at the start of a new rarity increase. For me, I like summoning at the start of epic difficulty enemies and then again as soon as the legendary enemies drop. Titus is obviously the flagship character for this event. Do your missions for Titus and get his damage and health stats potentially doubled. That's great and certainly makes him more useful for the event. I found the extra damage from Titus makes him particularly well suited to defeating the Tyranid warriors, who start with a reinforced Hive Node trait. The extra armor and block chance from the reinforced Hive Node means you really need quite a high damage dealer, and Titus is perfectly suited for this role. In terms of a kit, Titus's kit is fine, but Titus doesn't really carry the event. I certainly wouldn't try and create a lineup that tries to stack loads of damage on Titus's active ability, for example, using Barakiel. Sadly, when Titus dies, he doesn't return to battle with any of the power-ups that he picked up, so you're better off leaving this on your Gravis units, who will be much more resilient. With some fundamentals in there, let's circle back to the tier list. Clearly, the Mark 10 Gravis characters are in their own tier, the greater good, due to their survivability. Within that, Bellator makes summons to distract enemies, Burchard has an active that does blast damage and is useful for killing swarms, as well as a passive that does area of effect damage. Calgar's area of effect active can also clear a wave and get you out of a sticky wicket, while having a passive that is at its best in this all-Imperial event. Within the good tier, I'll run through the list. They aren't in any specific order. Lucian has a blast attack which makes short work of the Ripper Swarms, and a passive that lets him attack another target. Being able to attack multiple units in this swarm game mode is super useful. Mataneo also creates summons every turn to distract the enemy, but these aren't as useful nor as tanky as Bellator's Inceptors. Mataneo's flying also helps him to collect power-ups. Incisus is a necessary evil, as you would love to have more healers, but Incisus is the only one available here. Still, you can get by without him by playing smart with your summoners, Bellator and Mataneo. Jaeger has a nice counterattack that can help kill melee gaunts. Sarquel is a reasonable ranged unit that has an area of effect attack in a pinch, but also an overwatch and passive that sometimes lets him make 2 attacks in a turn. The other characters are average or bad, so I'll gloss over them. There are 2 advanced techniques or tips to point out. Your interpretation of advanced may vary depending on where you are in the leaderboard. Firstly, there's this button up on the top left that says Trigger Next Wave. I only learned this recently, but if you press this button on the top left of the screen, you can call the next wave of enemies. It gets you bonus points at the cost of potentially being overwhelmed, but I found it's generally reasonably safe to do at the very start of each run. 300 points is a lot, but also the enemies that are called are all weak little Hormagaunts. These do physical melee damage, and your Gravis boys can tank this easily. Use an area of effectability if you have one to clear through the increased numbers, and hopefully you can get a few enemy gaunts to flee. It is slightly risky, but a high yield strategy. Next up, Ragnar and Calgar. You've probably heard about this combination when Ragnar's War Howl boosts the damage and abilities of melee characters. It's great in guild raids, in tournament arena, and to the surprise of no one, it's excellent here too. In this run, my 18.6k run, I used it to clear through a wave of enemies that I otherwise would have struggled with. Giving Calgar bonus hits can increase the lethality of this combination even more. That's all I've got for just now. Hopefully it was helpful. If you are a Patreon, you're probably watching this video slightly earlier than everyone else. I'm going to try and continue doing that as far as the non-disclosure agreement allows. I want to give you all a massive shout out for supporting me and giving me the platform to continue doing this kind of work. If you are a newer player who hasn't yet used their referral code, I'd love it if you could enter mine. It earns you 100 Blackstone and supports me in the work that I do. It is single use though, so choose who you support carefully. Bye for now.
Doo-doo-dee. It's Nandi.